"Don't open that door, Ethan. You don't know who she is." The warning came sharp through the thin wooden wall, followed by the low murmur of neighbors who had already decided the ending before the story even began. Rain poured in steady sheets across the quiet Ohio street, tapping against windows, pooling along cracked sidewalks, turning the world outside into something cold and uncertain. Ethan Cole stood still in the dim glow of his porch light, his hand resting on the doorknob, his breath slow and measured. On the other side of that door stood a woman, soaked, silent, and completely out of place. He could hear it in the way she knocked. Not desperate, not frantic, just tired. "Please," her voice came again, softer this time, almost carried away by the wind. "I just need somewhere to stay for the night." 3 houses down, a curtain shifted. Someone whispered, "This is how people get scammed." Another voice, quieter but sharper. "Or worse." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, not to escape the moment but to weigh it. Life had taught him caution. Years of working double shifts, raising a 7-year-old daughter on his own, counting every dollar twice before spending it. None of that left room for careless decisions. But life had also taught him something else. Something quieter. Something stronger. Dignity didn't come from what you had. It came from what you chose to do when no one was watching. He opened the door. The woman standing there looked nothing like the assumptions being whispered behind curtains. Her dark hair clung to her face, rain dripping from every strand. Her coat, expensive once, maybe was soaked through, clinging to her frame as if it had given up trying to protect her. But it was her eyes that made Ethan pause. Not fear, not manipulation, just exhaustion and something deeper. "You don't have to trust me," she said, her voice steady despite the cold. "I just need a few hours out of the rain." Ethan looked past her for a moment. The streetlights flickered faintly against the storm, illuminating empty sidewalks in silent judgment. Then he looked back at her. "I don't need to know who you are," he said quietly. "I just need to know you. Need help." A brief silence followed, long enough for the rain to fill the space between them. Then she nodded. Not with relief but with something closer to disbelief. "Come in," Ethan said, stepping aside. Behind him, the house was small but warm. A faint smell of grilled cheese still lingered in the air, and from down the hallway came the soft hum of a child's cartoon playing too quietly to matter but too present to ignore. The woman hesitated at the threshold, as if stepping inside meant more than just escaping the storm. "Thank you," she said, barely above a whisper. Ethan gave a small nod, already turning toward the kitchen like it was just another ordinary night. But outside the whispers didn't stop. They grew quieter, sharper, waiting. Because no one on that street knew that the woman who had just stepped into Ethan Cole's home would come back in a way that would leave every single one of them completely silent. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel and means a lot to us. Now let's go on. The door closed softly behind her, muting the storm to a distant rhythm against the windows, but inside Ethan Cole's home, the quiet felt different, warmer, steadier, like a place that refused to let the outside world define it. He moved without hesitation, the kind of practiced calm that came from years of doing more with less, grabbing a clean towel from the back of a worn kitchen chair and handing it to her without a word, then turning toward the stove where a small pan still sat, the last bit of heat fading beneath it. "You can dry off," he said simply, his voice even, not curious, not prying, just present. She stood there for a moment, holding the towel like it was something unfamiliar, something she had not been offered in a very long time, then nodded once and gently pressed it against her hair. From down the hallway, a small voice called out, soft but bright, "Dad, is everything okay?" And Ethan glanced over his shoulder with a faint smile that barely lifted but carried warmth all the same. "Yes, sweetheart, everything is fine," he replied, his tone steady, reassuring in a way that did not need to be loud. The woman's eyes followed that voice, something shifting in her expression, something quieter than surprise, deeper than curiosity. Ethan moved to the cabinet, pulling out a simple mug, then another, filling them with hot water before dropping in 2 tea bags. The kind that came in bulk boxes, nothing fancy, just enough. "It is not much," he said, setting one mug on the table for her. "But it will warm you up." She stepped closer, slower this time, taking in the space. Around her, the small kitchen with chipped countertops, the refrigerator covered in crayon drawings, the soft hum of an old heater working harder than it should. This was not a place built on wealth, but it was built on something else entirely, something harder to define but impossible to miss. "You live here alone?" she asked quietly. Ethan shook his head once, a faint glance toward the hallway again. "Not alone," he said. "Never alone." And there was a quiet strength in that answer, the kind that did not ask for recognition. She wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into her fingers, her shoulders lowering just slightly, as if she had been carrying something invisible for far too long. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires hissing against the wet pavement, and somewhere, a curtain shifted again, watching, waiting, judging. Inside, time seemed to move differently, softer, more deliberate. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, not guarding, not questioning, just giving space. "You do not have to explain anything," he said after a moment, his voice low but clear. "You can just rest." She looked up at him, then really looked this time, as if trying to understand something that did not fit into the world she knew. "Why?" she asked, not suspicious but genuinely unsure. "Why would you do this for someone you do not know?" 3 seconds passed, quiet and still. The heater clicked, the rain softened, the house breathed. Ethan gave a small shrug, almost like the answer was too simple to carry weight. "Because someone should," he said. No speech, no justification, no need for more. And in that moment something shifted again, not in the room, not in the storm outside, but in her, something that had been guarded, distant, controlled, beginning to loosen just slightly. She lowered her gaze, not out of weakness but out of recognition, because for the first time in a long time she was not being measured, not being evaluated, not being seen for what she could offer or what she was worth. She was simply being allowed to exist, and Ethan, without knowing it, had just done something no amount of power or money had managed to do in years. He had given her something quiet, something rare, something that would follow him long after this night was over. The house settled into a quieter rhythm as the storm outside softened into a steady drizzle, the kind that no longer demanded attention but lingered like a reminder, and inside, the small kitchen carried the gentle sounds of normal life returning, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, the low hum of the heater, the faint echo of a cartoon laugh track drifting from the hallway. Ethan moved with quiet intention, pulling a simple plate from the cabinet and placing 2 grilled cheese sandwiches onto it, the edges slightly uneven, the bread brown just enough, then setting it on the table without ceremony. "You should eat," he said, not looking for gratitude, just stating what mattered. The woman hesitated again, her fingers still wrapped around the warm mug, as if accepting something so ordinary felt unfamiliar, almost undeserved. "You do not have to keep doing this," she said softly, her voice carrying a trace of something guarded, something practiced. Ethan glanced at her briefly, then back at the counter. "I am not keeping score," he replied. 3 simple words delivered without emphasis, but they landed heavier than anything else in the room. A small pair of footsteps padded down the hallway, then, light and careful, and a young girl appeared at the edge of the kitchen, her oversized sweater sleeves pulled past her hands, her eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. "Hi," she said gently, her voice carrying that natural openness only children seem to keep. Ethan's posture softened instantly, the lines in his shoulders easing as he turned toward her. "Hey, kiddo, this is..." He paused, realizing he did not know the woman's name. The woman looked up just for a second and something unreadable passed through her expression before she spoke. "Charlotte," she said simply. The girl smiled, stepping closer without hesitation. "I am Lily," she said, as if that introduction was enough to bridge any distance. Charlotte nodded slowly, watching the interaction with quiet attention, something in her gaze shifting again, something that looked almost like disbelief at how easily trust existed here. Lily glanced at the plate on the table, then back at Charlotte. "Dad makes the best grilled cheese," she added with quiet confidence, as if offering reassurance more than opinion. Ethan gave a small exhale that might have been a laugh, shaking his head slightly, but he did not interrupt. Charlotte reached for the sandwich, then, careful, deliberate, taking a small bite, and for a brief moment, everything else seemed to fade. The noise of expectation, the weight of whatever world she had come from, replaced by something simple and grounding. "It is good," she said after a pause, her voice softer now, less guarded. Lily nodded like she had expected nothing less, then slipped into a chair beside the table, swinging her feet lightly. "Are you staying with us?" she asked, direct in the way only a child can be. Charlotte froze for half a second, the question landing somewhere deeper than intended, and Ethan stepped in gently. "Just for tonight." he said, his tone steady but kind. Lily accepted that answer without question, as children often do when they trust the person giving it. Outside, the rain continued, quieter now, almost distant, and the world beyond the wall seemed to lose its grip on the moment. Inside, something fragile was taking shape, not dramatic, not loud, just real. Charlotte watched them both, the father who did not ask for anything in return, the child who gave trust without hesitation. And for the first time, her carefully controlled composure slipped just enough to reveal something human beneath it. Because in a house where nothing was impressive and everything was honest, she was beginning to understand a truth she had not expected to find, that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can offer is a place where you do not have to prove who you are. The night stretched on in a quiet rhythm, the kind that made small sounds feel larger, the ticking of the old wall clock, the soft creak of floorboards adjusting to the cold, the steady breathing of a house that had seen more hard days than easy ones. Lily had long since drifted back to her room, her door left slightly open the way Ethan preferred, just enough to hear if she called, just enough to remind him he was not alone in this world. Charlotte sat at the small kitchen table, her empty mug resting between her hands, her posture no longer guarded but not fully relaxed either, as if she had not yet decided whether this place was temporary or something she needed to understand. Ethan rinsed the dishes slowly, methodically, not rushing, not filling the silence with unnecessary words. Outside, a car slowed again along the curb, tires crunching lightly against wet gravel, and voices murmured faintly through the glass, curious, skeptical, waiting for something to confirm what they already believed. "They are still watching," Charlotte said quietly, not turning her head. Ethan dried his hands on a worn towel, glancing toward the window for just a second before looking back at her. "People like stories," he said, his tone calm, almost thoughtful. "Especially when they think they already know how they end." She let out a small breath, something between a laugh and resignation. "And what do they think this one is?" she asked. Ethan leaned lightly against the counter, arms resting at his sides. "That I made a mistake," he answered simply. 3 words, no defensiveness, no irritation, just fact. Charlotte studied him then more directly than before, as if trying to find the part of him that should have reacted differently, the part that should have cared about reputation, about judgment, about consequence. "And did you?" she asked. The question hung there, quiet but deliberate. Ethan shook his head once, not even pausing to consider it. "No," he said, "no explanation, no justification, just certainty." The heater clicked again, filling the silence for a moment, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before everything settled again. Charlotte looked down at her hands, at the faint lines where the warmth from the mug had faded, and something inside her shifted, something subtle but undeniable. "You do not ask questions," she said after a moment. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Not the ones that do not matter tonight," he replied. She lifted her gaze slightly. "And what matters tonight?" He thought for half a second, then answered, "That you are warm, that you are safe, and that my daughter sleeps without hearing something she should not have to worry about." The simplicity of it landed heavier than anything else he could have said. No ambition, no expectation, just responsibility and quiet care. Charlotte leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes moving slowly around the room again, the drawings on the refrigerator, the stack of unpaid bills held down by a magnet, the single photograph of a younger Ethan holding a much smaller Lily, both smiling in a way that felt real and unfiltered. This was not a life built on ease, but it was built on something steady, something she had not seen in a long time. Outside, another whisper carried faintly through the night air. "He is going to regret this," followed by a soft chuckle that did not quite hide the judgment beneath it. Charlotte's jaw tightened just slightly, not out of anger, but out of recognition. She had heard voices like that before, in boardrooms, in private meetings, in spaces where people decided the value of others without ever knowing them. "They think you are weak," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze for the first time in a while, his expression unchanged, calm, grounded. "Let them," he said. 3 words again, steady, unshaken. The kind of answer that did not need to defend itself. And in that moment, Charlotte realized something she had not expected to find in a small house on a quiet street in the middle of a storm: that strength did not always announce itself, did not always demand to be seen. Sometimes it simply stood there, unmoved by noise, unmoved by doubt, waiting for the world to catch up. And somewhere beyond the walls, the whispers continued, unaware that the story they thought they understood was already beginning to turn in a direction none of them could see. The house grew quieter as the night settled deeper, the kind of silence that did not feel empty but full, layered with small, human sounds that carried meaning if you listened closely. The steady hum of the heater pushing warm air through tired vents, the faint rustle of wind brushing against the siding, the distant drip of rain easing from the roof. Ethan moved through the living room with the same unhurried rhythm, adjusting a folded blanket on the couch, setting a small pillow at one end. Not as a gesture meant to impress but as something simple and expected, the kind of care that came without announcement. "You can take the couch," he said, his voice low so it would not carry down the hallway. "It is not much but it is clean." Charlotte stood near the doorway watching him, her posture straighter now, her composure slowly rebuilding. But there was still something different in the way she held herself, something less guarded, less distant. "You always do this?" she asked. Quietly, Ethan glanced at her briefly, then shook his head once. "No," he said. "Just when it matters." The answer lingered longer than the words themselves. 3 seconds of silence, steady and unbroken. Charlotte stepped further into the room, her eyes tracing the small details again, the worn fabric of the couch, the neatly stacked books on a side table, the lamp with a slightly crooked shade that still cast a warm, steady light. Nothing here was perfect. But nothing here was careless either. It was a life built piece by piece with intention rather than excess. "Where do you sleep?" she asked. Ethan gestured lightly toward the hallway. "I will take the chair in Lily's room," he said. Charlotte frowned slightly, not in discomfort but in confusion. "That does not make sense," she said. "This is your home." Ethan leaned against the wall for a moment, his expression calm, unshaken. "It is," he agreed. "And tonight, that means making space." The simplicity of that logic settled into the room like something heavier than it should have been. Outside, another car rolled by slowly, its headlights briefly washing across the curtains before fading again. As if the world beyond still could not look away. Charlotte let out a slow breath, her shoulders lowering just slightly. "You do not think this is risky?" she asked. Ethan tilted his head a fraction, considering, then answered. "Everything is risky," he said. "But not everything is wrong." 3 sentences, quiet, measured, each one landing with the weight of lived experience. Rather than theory, Charlotte looked down for a moment, then back up, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "Most people I know would never do this," she said. Ethan gave a faint, almost invisible smile. "Most people I know would not either," he replied. A small shift, subtle but real, passed through her expression, something that looked less like doubt and more like understanding. The kind that does not arrive all at once, but begins in quiet moments like this. From down the hallway, faint sound of movement came, Lily turning in her sleep, followed by a soft murmur that faded almost immediately. Ethan's attention shifted instinctively, listening, waiting, then relaxing again when the silence returned. Charlotte noticed that, the way his entire presence adjusted to something so small, so easily overlooked, and she understood without needing explanation that this was where his strength truly lived, not in what he said, but in what he carried without complaint. "You are not worried about what people will say tomorrow?" she asked after a moment. Ethan looked toward the window, where the last of the rain traced thin lines down the glass, then back at her, his voice steady, grounded. "People always say something," he said. "But they do not have to live with my choices. No anger, no defensiveness, just truth." Charlotte nodded slowly, absorbing that, feeling the quiet certainty behind it. And in that moment, something settled inside her. Not fully understood yet, not fully formed but present. Because in a world where everything she had known was built on control, perception and calculated risk, she had stepped into a place where none of that seemed to matter. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like she needed to be anything other than who she was in that exact moment. Standing in a small living room, in a house that had nothing to prove, with a man who had already chosen what mattered long before she ever knocked on his door. The night eventually gave way to a fragile stillness, the kind that comes just before morning begins to think about arriving, and inside the small house, everything had settled into quiet breathing rhythms, the heater clicking on and off, the soft creak of wood adjusting to the cold, the distant hum of a world that had not yet woken up. Charlotte lay on the couch, eyes open, staring at the ceiling where faint shadows moved with the passing clouds, her body still but her mind unwilling to rest. Turning over every moment of the night as if trying to make sense of something that did not fit into the rules she had lived by for years. She had been in penthouses overlooking cities, in private jets crossing time zones, in rooms where every word carried weight and every decision shaped outcomes worth millions. but none of those places had ever felt as disarming as this one. A modest living room with a worn couch and a man who did not ask questions. She turned her head slightly, listening. And from down the hallway she could hear it, faint but steady, Ethan's presence, not asleep, not restless, just there. The quiet kind of vigilance that did not demand recognition. Hours passed in fragments of half-rest until the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, pale and soft, brushing across the room like a gentle reminder that time moves forward whether we are ready or not. Charlotte sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders, and for a moment she simply remained there, taking in the stillness, the absence of expectation, the unfamiliar feeling of not needing to perform or decide or lead. She stood, moving quietly across the room, careful not to disturb the silence, and paused near the kitchen table where the 2 mugs from the night before still sat, one empty, one with a faint ring of cooled tea left behind. Her fingers traced the edge of the table lightly, as if grounding herself in something real before the world returned. She reached into her coat, now dry and folded neatly over a chair, and pulled out a small object, no larger than her palm, setting it gently on the table beside the mug, not as payment, not as explanation, but as something intentional, something that would speak later when she was gone. From the hallway, a soft sound of movement came and she froze for half a second, then relaxed when it faded again, knowing she had only a narrow window. Before the day fully arrived, she moved toward the door, her steps quiet, controlled, the same composure returning to her posture, but not completely, not in the way it had been before. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, her reflection faint in the glass, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel it, the weight of leaving a place that had asked nothing from her but had given something she had not known she needed. She opened the door slowly, the cool morning air slipping inside, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and early light. Outside, the street was empty now, the watchers gone, the whispers silenced by the passing of the night, leaving only stillness behind. Charlotte stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her with care, not wanting to break the quiet she was leaving behind. She did not look back immediately, as if doing so might change something she was not ready to change, but after a few steps she stopped, turning just slightly, her eyes resting on the small house, on the place that had existed outside of everything she understood. And then without another word, without another sound, she walked away, disappearing down the street as the morning light slowly took hold. Inside, the house remained unchanged, calm, steady, unaware that something had been left behind that would soon shift everything Ethan thought he understood. Not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Morning arrived gently. Not with noise but with a quiet shift in light that slipped through the curtains and settled across the worn floors like something familiar. Something earned, and inside the small house, Ethan Cole moved through his routine with the same steady rhythm he had built over years, the coffee brewing slowly, the toaster clicking softly, Lily's small footsteps padding into the kitchen with sleepy eyes and a quiet yawn. "Is she still here?" Lily asked, her voice soft, still caught between sleep and curiosity. Ethan paused for just a second, then shook his head. "No, sweetheart, she left early," he said, keeping his tone calm, not making it something bigger than it was. Lily nodded, accepting it in the simple way children do, then climbed into her chair, reaching for her breakfast without another question. But something felt different in the room, not wrong, just shifted, like a note slightly out of tune. Ethan noticed it without naming it, his eyes moving briefly to the living room where the folded blanket still rested on the couch, untouched since the early morning. He stepped over slowly, his movements quiet, and that was when he saw it, sitting on the kitchen table where it had not been the night before. A small object, simple at first glance but deliberate in placement. He picked it up carefully, turning it once in his hand, his expression unchanged but his focus sharpening. It was not expensive in appearance, not flashy, but it carried weight, the kind that did not come from design but from meaning. Lily looked over from her chair. "What is that?" she asked. Ethan glanced at her, then back at the object. "I am not sure yet," he said honestly. 3 words, quiet, grounded. He set it back down on the table, not dismissing it, but not chasing answers either. The morning continued, ordinary in every visible way, breakfast finished, backpacks gathered, jackets zipped, the routine of leaving the house unfolding like it always did. But outside, something else had begun to shift. A car slowed at the end of the street, then another, unfamiliar, clean, polished in a way that did not belong to this neighborhood. Neighbors noticed, curtains moved again, but this time the whispers carried a different tone, less mocking, more uncertain. Ethan walked Lily to the bus stop as he always did. his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. His attention on her world, not the one forming behind him. "You think she is okay?" Lily asked as they waited. Ethan nodded once. "I think she will be," he said. The bus arrived, doors folding open with a hiss, and Lily climbed aboard, turning back to wave before disappearing inside. Ethan stood there for a moment longer than usual, watching until the bus pulled away, then turned to walk back home. As he stepped onto his street again, he noticed it fully now, the line of vehicles parked along the curb, dark, quiet, intentional, nothing loud, nothing exaggerated, but unmistakably out of place. 3 people stood near the sidewalk, dressed in clean lines, composed, waiting. One of them glanced toward Ethan, then spoke quietly into a small device. Ethan did not change his pace, did not react outwardly, just continued walking, his posture the same as it had always been, steady, unbothered. But the air had changed, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but settles into everything. He reached his front yard. The house still as it had been, unchanged on the outside, and for a moment everything paused, the world holding its breath between what had happened and what was about to be revealed. Because whatever Charlotte had left behind was no longer just a quiet gesture on a kitchen table. It was about to become something else entirely, something that would turn every whisper, every doubt, every quiet judgment into silence. The moment stretched thin as Ethan stepped onto the worn concrete path leading to his front door, the quiet weight of something unseen settling into the air around him, and for a brief second nothing moved, not the neighbors behind their curtains, not the 3 sharply dressed figures standing near the sidewalk, not even the faint breeze that had carried the last traces of morning. Then one of the men stepped forward, his posture precise, his tone respectful but measured. "Mr. Cole?" he asked. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his expression calm, unreadable. "Yes," he replied. No hesitation, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. The man gave a slight nod, then stepped aside without another word. 3 black vehicles sat lined along the curb, engines off, doors closed, their presence quiet but undeniable, and as if responding to an unspoken cue, the rear door of the center vehicle opened slowly. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. A pair of polished heels touched the pavement first, followed by a composed, steady movement as Charlotte stepped out, no longer the rain-soaked stranger from the night before, but something entirely different, something unmistakable. Her coat was tailored, her posture refined, her presence carrying a quiet authority that did not need to be announced. Yet her eyes, when they met Ethan's, were exactly the same. 3 seconds passed in silence. No words, no movement, just recognition. Across the street, a curtain shifted wider, someone whispering, "That is her." Another voice, lower now, "That cannot be her." But it was. Charlotte walked toward Ethan with calm precision, each step deliberate, closing the distance without urgency, without hesitation. When she stopped in front of him, the contrast between them was undeniable. Not in value, but in appearance, in perception, in the way the world would have measured them if given the chance. "You left early," Ethan said simply. No accusation, no surprise, just fact. Charlotte gave a small nod, her voice steady, controlled. "I had to," she replied. 2 sentences, direct, grounded. A pause followed, heavier this time, filled with everything unsaid. One of the neighbors stepped closer to their porch, trying to listen, trying to understand. Charlotte reached into her coat pocket, pulling out nothing dramatic, nothing excessive, just a quiet confirmation. "My name is Charlotte Hayes," she said, her tone unchanged. "Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Global Holdings." The words landed without force, but their impact moved through the street like a ripple. Silence followed, not polite, not respectful at first, but stunned. Ethan did not react the way anyone expected. He did not step back, did not shift his posture, did not change his expression. He simply nodded once. "Okay," he said, one word, calm, steady, unchanged. Charlotte watched him carefully then, searching for something, surprise, calculation, expectation, but finding none of it. The world around them adjusted, people stepping closer, whispers fading into quiet attention, the judgment from the night before dissolving into something else, something uncertain. Charlotte took a small breath, her voice softer now, more personal. "I did not tell you because I wanted one night where none of that mattered," she said. Ethan met her gaze without interruption, without reaction, just listening. "And it did not," he replied, for words, simple, final. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, not tense, not uncertain, but grounded. Charlotte's composure shifted just slightly, not breaking but softening, as if something she had expected to defend no longer needed protection. Behind her, one of the men stepped forward with a folder in hand, but she raised her hand gently, stopping him without looking back. Her attention remained on Ethan. "What you did," she continued, her voice lower now. "No one does that without wanting something in return." Ethan shook his head once, not sharply, just enough. "That is where you are wrong," he said. 3 sentences, quiet, measured, each one carrying more weight than the ones before. And in that moment something changed again, not in the cars, not in the people watching, but in the space between them. Because the power had shifted, not from wealth, not from status, but from something far less visible and far more difficult to challenge. And for the first time since she stepped out of that car, Charlotte Hayes stood in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had finally met someone who did not need her world to define his. The silence did not break all at once, it settled slowly, like dust after something heavy had moved through. And for a moment no one on that street seemed to remember how to speak. The same voices that had whispered judgment the night before now held back by something far stronger than doubt, something closer to realization. Charlotte stood there, the weight of her world behind her, the polished cars, the waiting staff, the quiet authority that followed her everywhere she went. But none of it seemed to matter in the space between her and Ethan. Not in the way it usually did. She looked at him, not as a businessman would, not as a leader evaluating value, but as a person trying to understand something she could not measure. "You did not even ask my last name," she said, her voice softer now, stripped of its usual edge. Ethan gave a small shrug, his gaze steady. "You needed a place to stay, not an interview," he replied. 3 sentences, calm, grounded, unchanged. A faint shift passed through the crowd behind them, someone lowering their eyes, someone else stepping back, as if the truth of the moment had quietly rearranged their place in it. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just enough to reveal something real beneath the composure. "Do you know what most people do when they find out who I am?" she asked. Ethan glanced briefly at the line of vehicles, then back at her. "They probably start acting different," he said. She nodded once. "They do," she admitted. "They either want something or they become something they are not." A pause followed, heavier now, but not uncomfortable. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. "I am already who I am," he said. For words, simple, final. And that was the moment everything settled. Charlotte looked at him for a long second, not searching anymore, not questioning, just seeing. Behind her, the man with the folder stepped forward again, this time slower, placing it gently on the hood of the car without interrupting. Charlotte reached back and took it, opening it briefly before closing it again. As if the contents mattered less than the moment itself. "I wanted to offer you something," she said, holding the folder but not extending it yet. "A job, a house, security, anything you would need." The words were clear, generous, powerful in any other context. Ethan listened, then shook his head once, not dismissive, not ungrateful, just certain. "I appreciate it," he said. "But I am not looking to change my life overnight." 3 sentences, quiet, measured. Charlotte studied him again. This time with something new in her eyes, not confusion, not disbelief, but respect. "Then what do you want?" she asked. The question lingered, honest and direct. Ethan thought for a brief moment, then answered, "Opportunity," he said. "For my daughter." No hesitation, no added weight, just truth. Charlotte nodded slowly, understanding immediately, not because it was complicated, but because it was not. She closed the folder and handed it back to the man beside her without looking away from Ethan. "Then that is what you will have," she said. No grand gesture, no dramatic promise, just certainty. Another silence followed, but this one was different, steady, resolved, the kind that does not need to be filled. Charlotte took a small step back, the space between them returning, but not in the same way it had been before. "Thank you," she said, and this time it was not formal, not distant, it was real. Ethan nodded once. "You are welcome," he replied, simple, unchanged. She turned then, walking back toward the car, her presence still commanding, still powerful, but something about it had softened, something no one else there could quite name. The door closed, the engine started, and one by one the vehicles pulled away, leaving behind the same quiet street, the same small house, the same man standing in his front yard. But nothing was the same anymore. Across the street, a neighbor lowered their gaze, another quietly stepped back inside, the whispers gone, replaced by something heavier, something that did not need words. Ethan turned toward his door, reaching for the handle with the same steady movement as always, his life unchanged in the ways that mattered most. Because dignity does not rise when the world finally notices, it is built long before that moment ever comes. And sometimes the loudest proof of who a person is the silence they leave behind. A quiet act of kindness changes everything in one of the most touching stories about dignity, trust, and second chances. When a struggling single dad offers shelter to a mysterious woman on a stormy night, he has no idea she is a powerful female CEO hiding from the world. This unforgettable narrative unfolds through emotional depth and cinematic tension, making it one of the most touching stories that highlights how true character is revealed in silence, rather than status. As the single father chooses compassion over judgment, the female CEO discovers a rare sense of peace she cannot find in wealth or power, turning this into one of those touching stories that stay with you long after it ends. When truth is revealed and the world shifts, respect replaces doubt, proving again why touching stories like this resonate so deeply. This is more than a story of contrast between rich and poor. It is one of the touching stories that remind us that grace, humility, and quiet strength can transform lives in the most unexpected ways. In a world driven by appearance, this powerful journey stands among the most touching stories that celebrate humanity at its core. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Subscribe. There's more waiting to be told.